Yep.
Wow. So yeah, this is a bonus episode because there was still some stuff I wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So I was thinking actually we should change the title 21 or 22.1.1 and then 22.1.2.
Wow. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could do that. You want to do that?
Sure.
Doesn't really matter. Yeah, well, so I sent you actually a really good talk by Hoppe from like 3 weeks ago that he gave at the Mises Institute. And I think it laid out his philosophical. He basically gave a really good summary of how he got to where he is philosophically.
Nice.
That I thought was really useful.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, I kind of wish I had been more clear about all these distinctions because you're absolutely right. I mean, and I say that because I have read about this stuff, but you're absolutely right. What we're talking about here is a very fundamental distinction in philosophies. Which is empiricism versus rationalism, and it's really the continental Europe, the rationalists versus the Anglo-Saxon empiricists, and he is very much in opposition to Hume, but he's actually, as he was saying in the talk, and this makes sense because this is why I brought up Kant yesterday. He actually does agree with Kant's epistemology of. What was it? Synthetic a priori, and Mises actually uses that terminology in his book on human action, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, human action.
Yeah, human action, which maybe we should read at some point. It seems pretty influential. I mean, that was the thing that basically, and I also didn't realize he was basically a Frankfurt School person before.
Yeah, Hoppe, yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I thought was interesting. And he was basically a leftist, which I guess we all kind of are when we're young, right? Some of us more than others, I suppose.
Yeah.
Are
you looking up his teacher?
Yeah, it was Jürgen Habermas.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, you knew it off that. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah. Who's still alive. It was pretty crazy. 92 or something.
Yeah, and then Hoppe went to Las Vegas and put UNLV on the map a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say, especially hearing him talk, I mean, he is a very compelling. I mean, you can tell that he has just a very cogent mind.
Right.
You know, like he thinks about things very clearly. I think I would definitely say more clearly than I do, certainly on these topics. But there's still something missing a little bit. But I don't even know if we should go into this. So part of the reason we're doing the second episode is because we got hung up on the a priori versus empiricism stuff, and I wanted to kind of go more into his war sort of discussion in this episode because And also, I wanted to highlight, I think, something really important that I thought was really good, which was, and I was even going to text it to you to remind me to bring it up. It's basically the last sentence of chapter 1, whereas it is not government, monarchical, or democratic that is the source of human civilization and social peace, but private property. And the recognition and defense of private property rights, contractualism, and individual responsibility. I agree with that, actually. I think almost 100%. I mean, I'd say almost because it's like, who knows? If I think about it more deeply, maybe there's something I disagree with. But I think that idea that, and more succinctly put, it's the idea that infringement on property rights results in decivilization and an increase in the time preference. Or decrease in the time preference. Yeah. No, increase in the time.
Yeah, that's a weird one because you think increase and you think thinking further out, but it's the opposite.
Exactly. It is increase.
It's a weird term because actually I've thought about it. I can't quite pin down exactly what it means literally. Like preference for time is a.
I think that's it. Do
you prefer time or not prefer time?
Yeah, and by that I guess it means to say an increase in time preference means you want You value time more, so you want things more quickly.
Sure,
I guess
yeah.
is the idea. That's how I was kind of thinking about it. But I agree, it is like kind of a weird and confusing thing.
Because you'd think if you valued time more, you'd want more time. Anyway, it is.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a confusing term, but it's used a lot, not even just by Hoppe.
Right. Oh yeah. So did he not originate it? Do you know?
I don't know who originated it, but I hear it used all the time by non-libertarian folks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was funny in this talk. He's pretty. Yeah, it's interesting. What it was making me wonder is what he thinks about Goodell. You know, because that seems to be Goodell kind of put. I keep saying I don't want to talk about this. We shouldn't get bogged down by it again because it goes back to the a priori stuff. But, you know, Goodell is a rationalist, and he basically builds an axiomatic system that leads to a contradiction. Anyway, we don't have to talk about that. So how did you get to the war stuff? So
I don't think so, but if you just direct me to it,
so
we can talk about it.
So it's kind of getting at the idea that was it all government is expansive, but it's harder for monarchies to expand.
Right.
Because of kind of some of the reasons we said before is like you have a few ways you can expand. You can invade and you can purchase. And and then you can also marry in the case of monarchy.
I get to that. I did get to that because he starts talking about the Habsburgs are a good example of increasing their monarchical influence through systems of intermarrying with other royal families and groups.
Like Charles.
Yeah. I mean, the Habsburgs, it's crazy how far they got. I mean, all the way into Mexico. And
I know, yeah. Although that person got killed, didn't they? I think they got killed. Maybe not, I don't remember. There was like there's a famous story about a German family that went to Mexico. And yeah, I think it was the Habsburgs. And then it was like, the guy got killed by the locals, and then they fed his wife peyote and sent her back to Germany.
I mean,
she was basically crazy.
Funny.
And then she was crazy for the rest of her life. But yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah, they were a very powerful family, so in democracy though, you're sort of limited to. I mean, and this is where I quibble a little bit, but I think I see what his points is. He's basically saying you're essentially limited with democracy to war as the only expansionist method you can use, because it's like, you know, if you're a president, it's not like you can marry into
that won't
another
do anything.
Democrat. Yeah. And then because it's public utilities, I guess he's trying to say that you have a harder time purchasing things. You can't, like, I guess, take out loans as easily. But then I was trying to think, like, obviously, I don't think that was the reasoning. I can't remember the reasoning exactly.
Right.
But you know, I was thinking about, you know, obviously the United States has expanded. I guess his point would be the Louisiana Purchase was technically Jefferson, I think, technically bought that privately.
Right.
But then, was it Polk? I don't remember which president then sort of added the rest of the United States, but I'm pretty sure that was, you know, he wasn't doing it with private means. He was doing it with public funds. So that point I didn't quite understand.
Right. Do you know where it was? Do you remember what page?
I can try to find it. Yes, actually, it's right here.
Nice.
Page 33. Assuming, do we have the?
I think we have the same
edition. Yeah.
All right. So,
it's the first big paragraph.
Okay.
The first full paragraph. So not the.
So in addition,
not the top. Yes, exactly. Do you want to read it?
Okay. In addition, with public ownership and free entry into a democratic Republican government, the foreign policy changes as well. All governments are expected to be expansionary, as explained above, and there is no reason to assume that a president's expansionary desire will be smaller than a king's. However, while a king may satisfy this desire through marriage, this route is essentially precluded for a president. He does not own the government-controlled territory, hence he cannot contractually combine separate territories. And even if he concluded intergovernment treaties, these would not possess the status of contracts, but constitute, at best, only temporary pacts or alliances, because, as agreements concerning publicly owned resources, they could be revoked at any time by other future governments. So, I think, or should I keep going?
Yeah, I mean, no, that's good. If you want to, I think I also get it, but if you want to summarize,
I think it isn't that democratic governments cannot make treaties. It's that the only way to enforce such a treaty is through war or military strength.
Right.
You know, and we can see this with the NATO-Russia stuff that's going on now. The purpose of these treaties is military tactics. And you know, like we can have a treaty where we purchase Hawaii from Spain, but what ultimately makes that a legitimate, in quotes, purchase is our military presence there protecting it.
Yeah. Whereas I would say, I almost feel like you could say that is kind of true.
Yeah, maybe.
Regardless, because, you're dealing with people who, because I guess he would say yes, but if it was a monarch, it would at least be the monarch's private property.
Right.
And then by his, sort of over, like his worldview, then you should respect that, because ultimately he's saying, yeah, as we've said, respecting private property is what leads to civilization. But of course, there's plenty of people who don't respect private property, which is why you always kind of have to guard your territories regardless. And I thought he was also kind of getting at there, something that he's making a point of that we sort of emphasized yesterday was, the idea that there's increased change in democratic, republican, or there's decreased stability, basically, right? Because people are cycling over and over again, and it also, he made an interesting point about how laws are thus also become less stable, because 4 years later somebody else could come in and have a complete different interpretation of the law. As in some cases, I feel like we're seeing as we speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was a very good point, and I thought that was also kind of what he was saying, is that like another president could come in and be like, well, actually, this didn't really make sense for us to keep Hawaii, so we're going to give it back. Yeah, kind of thing. But I guess you could say that would happen. That could happen. Yeah, I mean, monarchist too. I
also struggle a little bit to see how this is unique to democracy. Essentially, all property, in my understanding. Well, so this is
careful.
So actually, there's a dispute between like what are they called? Objectivists, Ayn Rand folks, and libertarians.
Yeah,
and I don't really know where Hoppe would fall on this, but
he does. Yeah. He talked about Rand actually, but I'll let you finish.
So objectivists do not believe that force is what protects private property at the root. And a lot of libertarians believe that force is ultimately the final stopgap for the protection of private property. Because the objectivists say that once you have a system of force, you don't have a real society, because only like a society can only be formed through rational means, and a system of force is by definition irrational because it will be tyrannical in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I don't know. No, this is where this stuff it does get deep to a point sometimes where it gets a little cloudy to me, and I can't really see clearly.
Yeah, he didn't talk about that aspect when he brought up Ayn Rand.
Yeah, what did he? I've watched
talk.
the beginning of that talk, but I haven't seen the whole thing.
But oh yeah, it's very good. He just basically said that he first off didn't know about her very much when she was alive. Like she wasn't, I guess, very prevalent in Germany. And then he also said that he feels like there's a fundamental contradiction in some of her thinking, in that like she's also kind of a collectivist, even though she's known as an individualist, because she believes in, I think, collective punishment.
Right. Well, because her idea does have a small state, the night watchman state. Like she's a minarchist, some people say. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
A minarchist. Interesting.
Like the minimum.
No, I understand. We come up with all sorts of words. So that was another really interesting thing about. So again, I think one thing that was very striking listening to him talk is that he's, and is evident reading this, is that he's definitely thought very deeply about all these things and has a really good. I mean, it seems like he was actually coming at it more as a philosopher anyway. I mean, he's a political philosopher, right? I think, is that what he calls himself? He doesn't call himself an economist, right?
I don't think so.
In his introduction, he spoke. He said
he calls Mises an economist.
Yeah. But the point is that he brought up Wittgenstein because he was going into this whole thing about language that I thought was really interesting. And I, unfortunately, I just listened to it like 20 minutes ago, so I haven't fully appreciated it. And Wittgenstein, however you say his name, you know what I'm talking about. He was I mean, I've tried to read his stuff before, and it's just, it's very difficult. But he brought it up because I think he is approaching a lot of this from a language standpoint, because he was making this point about how, like, you can't know what you can't ever know what the goal of nature is, because I guess they can't communicate. Right.
Okay.
But you can know the goal of humans because we can communicate. And I think that's what he was saying. And then, anyway, this leads into, I think, his rationalist thought, basically.
Right.
Yeah. It's weird, though. I keep getting hung up on the rationalism versus empiricism, because I think what it is making me realize is I feel like I fall... He's very good in that, and maybe he's just slowly pulling me over into rationalism, but I feel like he's making me realize that there's something that they both have in common that I'm trying to get at.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because getting back to this idea of, like, it seems like sensations are a synthetic a priori, and Kant kind of, when I was reading Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, that's kind of what I felt like he was saying. Of course, I know Kant was responding to Hume, who took, again, Locke's empiricism to its logical end.
Right.
And I get, I don't know why I'm talking. I'm just ranting. Sorry. Just stop me.
No, it's fine. I don't think you're wrong. I mean, I have these, I go back and forth on these ideas myself. I don't think, I'm not a pure rationalist or anything like that. Because my major questions with it are things, like I've argued with libertarians about this, where they say that a principle is to be held regardless of the outcomes of it. The purpose of principles is not because they're achieving goals that you want. They're sort of self-purposed. And from my perspective, I don't understand why you would adhere to a system that is not producing things that you want. That makes zero sense to me.
Yeah.
Because to me, there's like, aren't we seeking the world that we are seeking? And then, on the other side of it, I also understand the idea of not being, sort of manipulative or dishonest in the way you're approaching things, and crafting systems that, give you a leg up over everybody else, or something like that. Like an intellectually dishonest system, I think is a bad system. And so I kind of see issues on both sides of this, and I don't really know where I fall.
Right. Well, and the other interesting thing, again, is so this philosophy, I guess Descartes was the first rationalist, although here's the funny thing, too, is Plato, I guess, was basically a rationalist. And we know how you feel about Plato. Because this is like the Platonic ideals. Like, they definitely believed in a priori. But and Descartes, his I think, therefore I am. I mean, that's the a priori. And but it's like, it's interesting that both the continent and England sort of ended up in the same place scientifically, despite having different philosophies, supposedly different philosophies. And so that's my point, is there's something that is similar between them where they got to the same point somehow.
So I think where I see the strongest critique of where rationalism can lead is if you look at what happened with all of the Marxist offshoots.
Right. Well,
and the brutality that it gives people moral permission to do all sorts of things because they're applying a principle.
Right.
They're not looking, they don't care about the outcome.
Exactly.
And so, like, what's his name? British comedian Stephen Fry talks about this because he talks about how he's an empiricist in that he would rather look out at the world and see a better outcome and not even know why.
Right.
If something is working and we don't know the mechanism yet, that's fine.
Isn't
from
that
this perspective.
Didn't you say Ayn Rand said that too? Or
I think Ayn Rand's the exact opposite.
Maybe it's that. It's just I feel like you brought up her in with respect to that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not a scholar of her.
Yes, you are.
Theory, but my understanding of her is that she has the exact opposite opinion. And for me, I don't know. It's like I think that they both of these ways of existing are important.
Right. And that's why yes.
And it's this thing because when we're reading Hoppe, I start to get annoyed, and it's this thing where it's actually I don't think I can argue him.
Yes, he's too logical.
But at the same time, I think I can reject it outright
if you don't agree with his principles.
Exactly, and this is the thing. It's like I don't need to argue with Marcuse. Did I say Hoppe? Maybe or critical theory. It's when we're reading Marcuse.
You said Hoppe. You did say
I meant Marcuse. Yeah. I can't out argue Marcuse with all of his like webs and strings and stuff like that. I'm not going to win that fight, but I don't need to have that fight. I can reject it outright. Empirically, I don't want that world. There's nothing about that world that I like, whether or not he has some argument about it is the most rational or blah 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 blah. Doesn't matter to me.
Right.
And that's the empirical side of things that I see the value in that because I think that rationality can be used as a weapon.
Yes.
It can't, but this is where I appreciate Hoppe is I see Hoppe as an honest actor when I read it. And I see Marcuse as a dishonest actor. Right. And I think that, and that's just me. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe Marcuse was completely sincere, but his own theory suggests that he should not be sincere.
Right.
And so I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
And so so Hoppe's stating what he thinks, and then I can agree or disagree with it, like that thing that we just read. I think it's a fair question you brought up. I've kind of like been glancing at these paragraphs while we're talking, and when it says that the only way that a democratic ruler can expand their territory is through war, I don't know. There's treaties as far as I understand, and so I don't know. I don't understand, and I imagine I could ask Hoppe and he would have a thought, and maybe it would be satisfactory, maybe it wouldn't. But it doesn't feel dishonest. It just feels like this is where he's come to, and there's probably a reason that I'm either not understanding or maybe he hasn't thought it out.
Right. It was probably the former, because it seems
I agree. I'm just saying it's possible.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that is a really good way to encapsulate it. I feel basically the same, and that's and then again, that's what I keep getting at is there is some link between empiricism and rationality, and they use each other. Empiricists use rationality, and vice versa.
Right.
Yeah. He made a very provocative statement in this, I think provocative, certainly if you're a sociologist, that basically sociologists, there are no laws that can be determined in sociology.
Right.
And then he was saying another common mistake economists make is assuming that things that they're saying do not have universal laws. Like calling certain things that are universal laws, not universal laws.
Sure.
I guess one would be like he brings up the idea that if you're going to consume something in the future, then you have to have production that precedes it.
Yep.
That kind of thing.
This is actually where reading Mises is interesting, because Mises critiques and the whole libertarian movement critiques microeconomics to an extreme degree, and we've talked about this a little bit before. Yeah, but they tend to be macro focused, and they say not in the basics, not like supply-demand curves are supply-demand curves for all economists, but they think that they're quantifying all the wrong things. Right. So they think they can quantify something like value, which is not quantifiable from their perspective, and then they constantly are trying to see if taxation is creating wealth when that's axiomatically impossible. Right.
Or increase in the money supply automatically leads to devaluation of the currency.
Right.
Yeah.
Even if they have a fancy equation that spits out something else.
Right. And so I think this all gets at why I keep trying to bring it back to the physiology, which, again, I'm sure there's people that disagree. And in a sense, this is what Locke was trying to do. There's something very interesting here, obviously, because people have been pondering this for freaking millennia.
So where are you bringing it to physiology?
Well, because I keep basically saying, like, sensation to me is a type of a priori. You're accepting that the things that you're seeing exist, right? Like, I think, therefore I am. Like, I do, I almost feel like that is acknowledging that the sensations are the preceding thing to the thing that is you. And then,
I think I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's basically what Locke is saying. He's saying that your mind is made up of the sensations of the world. And I mean, he takes it to a very pure degree, saying like tabula rasa, you're literally a blank slate. Yeah. Well, I think actually Aristotle was more extreme in that. But yeah, I mean, but I take it back to the mind because it's like, I feel like there does seem to be something that we push up against that is universal, which is evidenced by the fact that one person can come up with math, right? That then another person can come in and verify, independent of even knowing, them, and that there are certain, and then you can model things in the universe with this.
So we can approximate objectivity.
Yes, but for me, I'm still trying to get at, there's an aspect of the neural network that is our brain that seems to me to be having a play in how this is interpreted. And it also it seems possible that there's a completely different way of organizing a brain that we don't know about because it's just, for whatever reason, on Earth it hasn't evolved. But for all we know, somewhere in the universe there exists a biological or whatever, maybe it doesn't even have to be carbon-based. It could be silicon-based, but that has a different way.
Gold-based is what I'm hoping.
Gold-based, yeah. What is that? The monoatomic gold, you might say? Yeah. We'll get back to the Anunnaki later. But that basically has a different math, basically. I can't even conceive this, but that's what I'm saying, is it still seems like the way that you interpret the world is based off of the network. I've said this too many times on the podcast.
I think that's right.
Probably.
I agree. I mean, so like the idea that experience is the end of the line. I actually think that for me, it's the turtles thing. Like, I don't think I don't think there is a true beginning, because you could say that before experience comes the physiology, and then you could say that you only know the physiology through experience. Blah blah blah. Who the hell knows? This is where it gets so murky at the bottom that, to me, it's similar to arguing about how the universe started. It's like, we're not going to figure this out.
Yeah. Well, and it made me think. Yes, I agree.
And like, we can't figure out how to make a bridge. Let's do that. That's cool.
Well, but it's like we can also figure out things at this level, because again, we have made advances in science based off of this. But you're right. It's like, this is where I also agree with the a priori thing. You have to have a basis.
Yes.
Of something to go somewhere. So anyway, maybe we're empiro-rationalists. We'll make up a new word.
Yeah. Oh, no, we will never be allowed in the Mises Institute.
Empiro-rationalists?
They'll be so mean to us.
Well, did you want to be let in? I didn't. I mean, I don't care.
I don't know. I have a friend who played there, and I kind of want to get invited to play there. But
played music there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's kind of cool. Why? Yeah. Under what circumstances?
I don't remember why she
event?
Was playing there. It was some event that they hired her to play for.
What kind of music does she do?
She's like a singer-songwriter.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I wasn't sure. Or was it like, a concerto,
No, that'd be neat.
Yeah.
No. They're not quite that stuffy. They're stuffy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Yeah,
I've even thought about trying to apply to be a fellow there or something. Write about individualism in music and stuff. But I feel like it's not quite appropriate. It's not quite Mises level. Like, I don't have like thoughts that deep.
Well, but I think first off, you're discounting the depth of your thought. I think that this podcast is giving you a pretty good arsenal to start to think about that.
In a couple of years.
Yeah,
I'll be able to have some stuff. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I'll just say that. I'll go on record saying that.
Yeah. Or maybe I'll get kicked out. Like Walter Block just got kicked out unceremoniously. So.
Yeah, who was that again?
He mentions, Hoppe mentions him in the acknowledgments at the beginning of the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's an old libertarian guy. He was a Columbia guy. He studied with Rothbard and Ayn Rand. He has a whole story. It's kind of funny. Did we talk about it on the podcast, or did we talk about it?
Was it where that they were getting angry at each other because they thought they were socialists or Marxists? Or something?
No. That's a different one. No. Walter Block was a young student, and they met. His story. This is his story, but he met Ayn Rand at a dinner or something like that. And he was a young socialist from Brooklyn. He was like going to tell her off, and so she went and talked to him, and apparently. She said that she would only talk to him if he agreed to two things. One, if he read a book on the principles of economics, and I'm not remembering what that book is right now. And then two, if the conversation was not over until they resolved it. So it's not going to be over today or next week or next month. They're going to keep getting together and hashing it out until it's resolved.
This was Ayn Rand that said this? I actually really like that.
So he has to be knowledgeable on the principles of economics, and then they have to figure out the problem.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, it's a little dictatorial, but she's allowed to do that.
Yeah,
I suppose. Yeah. That's pretty funny. So why did he get kicked out?
Because he is supporting Israel openly in this matter, and the Mises Institute is pretty not with Israel.
I didn't really know much about the Mises Institute. I finally did just Google them and was looking at it. And I was realizing some of the first articles that come up are exactly that, which makes sense. Yeah, from a libertarian standpoint, you're not an interventionist, right? Interventionalist, yeah. Which is why Dave Smith is so vocal about this, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. So he got kicked out. Wow.
Yeah, and he's old too, and it was unceremonious. It was this whole thing. Hoppe wrote, I think, an open letter explaining it, and it was just like, it was rough.
Oh, so was Hoppe at like the...
Hoppe was kind of as I
charge?
understand it, was kind of the one who was like, we got to get rid of this guy. He's not. And they're like old buddies, so it's kind of sad.
Yeah, I don't like that.
No, it's not. It's not nice. But all these people, like Ayn Rand was like that too. They're all like, the principle is the thing.
I think you and I agree that it's just like, come on.
To me, this is where like the I'm a little bit of a hedonist, but it's also it's my life, and I want to have a good time with the people I'm with.
Yeah, true.
Like, I don't want to waste my days either. They're my days, and my value is also my interactions with people.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know.
But maybe that's me being a coward or something. I don't know. There's probably a great argument against what I just said.
No, you're right, though. I mean, I even feel this a little bit when we go back on the anarchy stuff. It's like there's a certain point where it's just exhausting probably for both of us because we're not really...
Right.
Don't you feel that way a little bit?
But I'm not going to write a letter and not be your friend anymore.
I don't. Just give it 50 years.
Also, there's nobody I know who is with me on this. So not a single person in my social world is with me.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Well, so yeah. I mean, I hope. Yeah. Anyway,
you're probably the closest. I mean, what's crazy is of anybody.
I was going to say that actually.
Yeah.
I feel like I probably
you at least understand it the most.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So yeah. So that was one point that I wanted to bring up about the about war.
The thing about slavery was sort of interesting.
Oh, yes. Thank you. That was another thing. Yes. Public versus private slavery.
Yeah. So what did you think about that?
I thought it was very provocative. Well, not very. Actually, it wasn't too provocative. I thought it was cogent in its reasoning. Of course, it wasn't putting a value. But it was saying, I think it was kind of saying, it was kind of putting a value. I got the impression that he was saying public slavery is worse than private slavery.
Probably.
And so,
I mean, from his reasoning, it also makes sense to me.
Right. So we'll just define it. So in the case of public slavery, it is exactly what you would expect from his previous definition of public ownership of government, where it's basically nobody owns the slaves. The slaves are collectively owned. Right. And then versus private is that you privately own slaves, right? So an example of this would be a private ownership of slaves would be obviously the American South prior to the Civil War, and public ownership is...
the entire Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And because, he's defining slavery as is basically not able to basically have any control over your time, and you're not able to leave, right? And so, he's giving examples of how it's like you couldn't leave the Soviet Union, and you couldn't just be dilly-daddling.
You didn't own your labor. You didn't own the products of your labor.
Yes. That's the way to put it.
You didn't own your house. Exactly. You didn't own a car. Right. Like, it was all state-owned.
Right, and then the government...
And you were not allowed to exit.
And the government officials were able to basically tell you to do something if they felt like you weren't working.
Right.
Yeah, so which is exactly what you said. I was just giving an example. So, I thought that was a very interesting point. And I thought was a very... Yeah, I mean, I actually... Of course, I've heard people refer to the Slavs as slaves, right? And the Soviet Union being a sort of slavery style, but I hadn't ever kind of heard it so cogently put like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. And I guess I didn't appreciate how you couldn't leave the Soviet Union.
Right.
When did that?
But that's been true. That's been true of every. I mean, you can't leave North Korea. You couldn't leave Maoist China. You couldn't leave Cambodia. You can't leave. Well, it's like you can now. You used to be you couldn't leave Cuba.
Right. I mean, that right there should tell people that there's an issue. If you can't leave the country, it's like, what are you doing?
Well, I feel like the thing is, it tells everybody there's an issue. Nobody's going to say the Soviet Union was awesome. They'll say that wasn't. They weren't doing it right.
Right.
That was just because, that was because they were trying to battle the capitalists
Right.
or something, and that's what happens.
But you bring up a really good point. Why is it that anytime a Marxist regime, I guess they would say, well, Venezuela is not this way, but anytime it
I don't think you can leave Venezuela.
people
Why everybody who comes here from Venezuela, they come as
refugee.
Yeah, they're like a political asylum.
Well, but that doesn't mean that they can't leave. It just means that.
Yeah, I don't know that they can't leave entirely, but I think that there are all heavily socialist states, with the exception of the U.S. for some strange reason, have extremely tightly controlled borders.
Well,
every country in Europe, whether or not their literal borders are tight, they have very, very strict rules of it. You can't just go to the Netherlands and start working.
Well, and this was actually another point he made about the monarchist way, which so this was a thing I wanted to also talk about, and there's a great transition, so thank you, is that he was bringing up this historian. Oh, how do you like that? It's like his footnotes were like basically you could.
I kind of liked it because it was very
good.
thorough. It's like you're seeing exactly where he's getting this information.
Yeah, but it was like you were basically reading two books. It's like you've got like two stories going on because he's going into these rabbit holes in the footnotes. But yeah, he kept talking. He kept quoting this one historian. Let me find his name. Oh, well, as I'm finding this, what do you think of his idea that indeed monarchy and democracy can be conceived of analytically as representing the two endpoints of a continuum with various possible forms of government located at greater or lesser distances from one or the other extreme? What do you think of that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Whatever, man.
Whatever, man.
Guglielmo Ferrero. Is that who you said? Ferrero? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. It's the Guglielmo that I remember.
Right, yeah. I didn't say it on purpose because I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it.
You know me, I like to butcher names.
You just go right in there.
I go right in. I say Marcuse. It's whatever, man. It's all good. Peace and war, exactly. And he's saying, in the 18th century, they note, never had war been so harmless. This was one reason why governments went to war so lightly. On the other hand, governments also withdrew from war much more easily than in later times. Their treasuries might be exhausted, their trained soldiers used up. Only practical and rational questions were at stake. Peace was almost as easy to make as war. Yeah, so anyway, and then it was also in another part of this saying how easy it was to navigate across Europe too, and that's how I got on this because when monarchies were in control, and I don't know, it was making me wonder because I also feel like I remember reading places where it's like during wartime, especially like the Napoleonic Wars, it was actually really difficult to travel across Europe. But I guess he would say that's the beginning of the push back against monarchy.
Well, because there's a lot of theories that Napoleon was the beginning of the progressive movement.
Right.
Also, I think that if we're talking 18th century, all like international travel would be significantly easier than today, because borders are controlled. We have passports, and there's walls and armed guards and points of entry where you have to scan passports and stuff. I mean, we have this whole technology apparatus now.
Right.
That before, so whether or not you were even legally allowed to go into a country, some king said, like the Spanish king said, we're not allowing any Greeks here. Some like whatever. You could still probably get away with it, like you can go there because there's not, don't go to this one spot where he's got some guards, but they didn't, it wasn't possible to control it to the degree that it is.
I think that's a very good point. I was thinking sort of the same thing, just not as clearly. Is that it's not taking into account that if the technology was the same, maybe monarchies would have had the same control.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, that's essentially what you're saying.
Well, I wasn't saying that, but I see how that's sort of an implication of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I was just saying the more practical idea of the systems that have arisen out of the nation states I think, do make travel quite difficult.
Right.
In comparison.
Right.
But travel's also easier. We have airplanes. Like, it doesn't take us 3 weeks to get to Europe anymore. It takes us 7 hours. So that aspect is significantly easier. But there's a whole technological system in place that is difficult to navigate.
Right. Yeah, so I was almost thinking whether this guy's book would be an interesting one to read, or like The Conduct of War, one of these, because it was making me just, it's such a different impression of the past than I had, though, of like this idea. And you've brought up similar points about like how in the past it was like war didn't used to be, it wasn't total war, right?
Right.
And I mean, people certainly point to Napoleon as the beginning of total war too.
Right.
But then I would say, well, what about Sparta? And and
I think that it usually is a statement, and maybe they're overplaying their hand on this one, but I think that what you don't have today is you don't have a situation of warring kingdoms where the people in those kingdoms are largely unaffected, and they were Spanish and now they're French, and it's just like they're just still working their farm.
Right.
That doesn't happen so much today.
Well, and he also was basically putting nationalism on the back of democracies. And I don't know about that either. Because it's like, it seems like you've had nationalist spirit forever. It's just a group of people. And as we've said, you can have groups of people, small groups of people that are democratic, that are monarchical.
I think it's the question was a 14th century peasant in Gaul, like, into being Gaulish?
See, I think so, because I think that was how the states came about. It was like, we are these people, or just look at the Vikings, right? I mean, these were just
because like you read the Bible, all the people, they don't call themselves Romans. They don't think of themselves as Romans. They don't have any nationalistic pride for Rome, even though they're technically within the state of Rome.
Right. But they have nationalistic pride for their region, and I guess that maybe that's
not really, kinda. Yes, okay. The Old Testament, the idea of Israel as a nation, there is a sense of nationalistic pride. I would say
sense.
Yeah. But in the New Testament, I don't get any nationalism at all.
Well, because that's about universal brotherhood and stuff, right? I mean, that's kind of Jesus's whole shtick,
right?
Which is how it took down the Roman Empire. No, according to Gibbons, Right. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think he said that.
No, I mean, it's true. It's true. The Old Testament, there are nations, and then there's the nations of Israel, and there's all these subsets and stuff.
And it's all about like what are all the names? I don't even know all the names that Israel has been fighting, but there's tons of nations and people that the Israelis were documenting in the Old Testament,
right?
That they were fighting. Maybe they didn't fight the Phoenicians, but they were around.
The Philistines, no, they were buddies.
The Philistines,
the Philistines, the Amalekites,
the Sumerians,
right?
So that's what I'm saying is like it seems like nationalism happens just with people, regardless of what is organizing them. But I don't know.
Well, I think that tribalism happens with people, and then sometimes that is pointed towards a nation, and sometimes it is less. I think that there are situations with less nationalism, and I don't know if what the variable that changes that is democracy versus monarchy. My guess is probably it might have something to do with it, and it might. And I don't think that is the lone variable.
Right. Well, and let me read his explanation for why he thinks democracy. So he says, in contrast, democratic wars tend to be total wars, and his reason is in blurring the distinction between the rulers and the ruled. A democratic republic strengthens the identification of the public with a particular state. Indeed, while dynastic rule promotes the identification with one's family and community and the development of the cosmopolitan outlook and attitude, democratic republicanism inevitably leads to nationalism, i.e. the emotional identification of the public with large anonymous groups of people. So that's how it's probably how he's defining nationalism. Maybe I'm defining it a little bit differently. How do you feel about that definition? Emotional.
I think it makes sense. The biggest thing I'm thinking as I'm listening to this is my critique, which maybe it's not fair. It feels like they're not going back very far.
Yes.
Like, the 18th, maybe the 17th century or something is sort of a starting point, and then it feels like a very sharp relief. But, if we go back to the Old Testament, those were monarchies.
Right. Exactly.
The stories of the warring Israeli nation were under kings.
Right. And maybe it's because he's focusing on the West, I don't know, or maybe it's because he looks at the 18th century as the height of monarchism. But then you could also say if it's a height of monarchism, then how good was it if it just got supplanted by democratic republicanism? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it must not have been that stable if it was able to be toppled. But I guess we could say that about. We'll see what
I think. I mean, if I look at the landscape, I think that the early 20th century is wildly brutal.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah,
I guess I don't know why that happened, but I don't like it.
Yeah,
I'm not for it.
But that's the thing is like brutality has always been a thing, and in some cases, I feel like life was more brutal in the 18th century in just different ways. Again, there were.
But it's possible that wars weren't as brutal. I don't know. I don't know the history well enough to comment on it.
Yeah.
It strikes me that is possibly true.
Well, I'll just give you an example. I mean, and again, this is technically before his time, but like in the beginning wars in the 16th and 17th century that used guns, I mean, there was so much brutality in when, Europeans started fighting each other with guns.
Right.
And so in my head, yes, it's like, then of course mustard gas was terrible. But, I also wouldn't want to get sliced open by a bayonet. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know.
Right.
I guess they had bayonets in World War I, too,
And II.
Yeah, right. But we're slowly getting away from swords. I don't know. I think I'd rather be shot than stabbed.
Yeah, same.
So just on that alone, it seems like being stabbed is more barbaric and brutal. You know what I mean? And there was more stabbing that went on in the past.
Yeah, but you could also run away easier. The battlefield is
right.
I don't know. I think that
this is an interesting argument. I mean, it's a hard one to make.
I think if we look at the American Revolution, it kind of suggests Hoppe's point a little bit. The way that the seceded America was fighting was completely different from the way that Britain was fighting.
Yes.
And the way that Britain was fighting is the traditional way to do war.
It was organized and
which
civil.
Is not so. And the seceded colonies were essentially
guerrilla,
forcing total war on them.
Yeah, with guerrilla warfare and whatnot.
Right.
Because it was total war for them. I guess that was kind of the
exactly. So for the democratic folk, it is total war because war is total war from the perspective of democracy. Right. That aspect of it, I agree with. And on the other side, if you have a system of war where there's like a battlefield with two armies fighting each other, of course, the way fewer civilians are going to die because it's the point is some sort of strange military exercise. I think it's really weird. I think that the monarchic version of war it puts into sharp relief how insane war is.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would anybody agree to do that?
Yes.
Like, I'll go to jail. I don't want to go out into a field and volley shots with another line of people for no reason.
And so that's it. Is like just the way they were explaining it. I think that's a very good point. It's like they were explaining it and again, it's good to remember he's not necessarily saying monarchy is good. He's just saying it's better than democracy, right? But yeah, like he keeps quoting like Howard, War in European History. So completely was civil life divorced from war that in his sentinel journey of France and Italy, through France and Italy, Lawrence Stern relates that during the 7 Years' War in 1756 to 1763, he left London for Paris with so much preservation that it never entered my mind that we were at war with France, and that on his arrival to Dover, it suddenly occurred to him that he was without a passport. So they did have passports, I guess. However, this did not impede his journey, and when he arrived at Versailles, the Duke of blah, blah, blah had one sent to him. Sorry, that wasn't actually what I...
Wait, what year? I don't think they had passports in the 18th century.
1756 to 1763.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah. That's... My point is you had some semblance of like, this is our space, obviously, and this is your space, you know, and I'm sure there, like, as we've just seen, there must have been a way to document that.
But like, if you read about ancient Rome, how they were able to tell if somebody was a foreigner, it was weird stuff.
Yes.
They'd like look at you. Do you look foreign? Do you have a funny accent? And they'll like ask who your parents are and stuff.
Yes. Yeah. I can't find the quote, but it was just a very rosy picture of war, like, you know.
So what I'm saying is what makes sense to me is, you know, war is always brutal, but a system of war where you have armies fighting on a battlefield is significantly less brutal for the entire population than you have nations battling in towns and cities and villages.
Right. I mean, conscription changed the basis of warfare, right? Hitherto,
of course. Well, that's another thing, is you're bringing the entire population into it. This isn't your knight class going fighting some other knight class.
Right. But this is another point of where it's like there's examples of this in history, like the Crusades. I mean, when the Europeans that went on the Crusades they brought their wives and children. I mean, it was like, it wasn't the whole, obviously, country that was going, but it was like a total war for the subset of people that went, you know what I mean? And it was, I guess, you know, done by the Pope, who was essentially a monarch, right? I mean, yeah. So to your point of, it's like, it feels like he's not going back far enough often with this. But I think there's a point, and I just can't remember why. I mean, I think the point, again, why he focused on the 18th century is because that was like the height of monarchy in his head or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So has it just all been downhill since 1750? Once Bach died, you know, that was it. It's like,
God. I mean, he's pretty good at music.
Yeah. Well, but that's kind of the thing that I feel like Hoppe's kind of getting at is that, you know, it does. Well, I guess no, because he's anarchistic, right? But it feels like he's almost saying we should go back to this like Austria-Hungarian way of doing things, where you have a bunch of little city-states that are, you know, I don't know, maybe connected by a king, but not necessarily. I guess he would say the best one would be if you just have a bunch that are not overseen by a king.
Right.
And
but I understand the idea. It makes sense to me that in a monarchic system, the average person is going to have less interaction with the government than in a democracy. Because in a democracy, the average person is roped into the government by definition.
Right. Yes. And you know, monarch, because government is the prerogative of the monarch, so they can get good at it, and then they're training their kids to do it and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So you have professional, you know, as much as we hate the professional. I mean, but that's the thing. Is so. And that's why I brought up this point about decivilización yesterday, because and that maybe some people actually want decivilización, because it's like no matter how good, no matter how all positive you can make things with respect to monarchy, there's enough bad that it did make people feel like they wanted to rebel, right? Because it's like, I just don't take... I guess this is kind of what you're saying. It's like it feels like it's taking too much autonomy out of the populace to say that they were just led to be democratic republics by, you know, a group of people.
I don't think it's. I think they have autonomy. I think it's like this thing. Like most people are kind of dumb.
Well,
and they don't people can be convinced because it's. You can say, "Hey, it's not fair that the king is doing all this stuff and you don't have any say." And most people would be like, yeah, that you're right. That's totally not fair. But then there's, what is the alternative? There's a funny sketch. It's a comedy sketch from The Whitest Kids You Know. And it's like it's a critique of anarchy, because, a lot of them were sort of like left-wing anarchists at NYU and stuff like that. But it's a pretty funny sketch where they like destroy the government, and then somebody's like, okay, cool, now what do we do? And everybody's like, have a celebration. And somebody's like, okay, well, that's cool, but I have a farm, and like, if we want food, somebody's going to need to like go take care of that. And I can do that, but then I'm going to need somebody to like come and help me out with, like making sure that my house stays in good repair. And someone's like, okay, I guess I'll go help his house, but then I need somebody to help me out by giving me some extra food or like whatever. And it's just like, and then like society is just recreated.
Right.
And so it's like this thing. It's like you can easily be convinced that you're being screwed because you are definitely being screwed.
Right.
You can then also easily be convinced of a very like poor remedy for that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at, though, is like there was good reason for the French Revolution outside of the fact that Robespierre and the Mountain, they were just trying to get power. There was also, as we've discussed in previous episodes, like rampant taxation by this private class of individuals who basically were exploiting people.
Right.
And then also the monarch was in deep debt. Right. I mean, yeah, so...
And this is where it feels almost like Hoppe's, being an empiricist or something like that, because he's essentially doing like a lesser of two evils. He's calculating it out like, yeah, you're for sure being screwed, but do you actually want this other world that's way more brutal?
Well, and not only that, he's using past experience to make these arguments, right? Which is, that's exactly what empiricism is.
Right. And I don't know what he would say to any of this stuff. We should get him on the pod.
We should get him on the pod.
Yeah, on the pod.
Hoppe,
you want a boost in your
Yeah, we'll boost you.
I like that his books are free. That's nice.
They are?
Yeah.
Why did I buy mine?
Well, you might have to buy a physical copy, but you can download them all free off the Mises Institute.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because actually it was kind of expensive. It was like $40.
Oh. Yeah. No, you can download it free off Mises Institute.
Yeah, well, you know me. I like the pages. I think that was basically most of what I had.
It's funny. I feel like now we're all down on Hoppe. I think that Hoppe is like an amazing thinker. He's like he's a huge.
Oh no, I don't think that at all. I agree. I mean, like as I said, sort of opening.
Yeah.
Well, you're just kissing some what.
Yeah, exactly. I just feel like it's just funny that we got to this point. But actually, I agree that I think, or I don't know. This is the problem: is I don't know enough. I haven't read enough of his stuff to be able to know really where he falls on all this. But
what have you read of? What else have you read of him?
So I've started reading this one in the past and never finished it, and I've started reading. He has like a brief history of humanity or something like that. Where he goes back to, like 20,000 years ago or 60,000 years
ago. Oh, yeah. You brought that up when we were thinking about what to read. Yeah, because honestly...
Because it's one of those, it's like a rational construction of the basis for society and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like a really interesting book.
Yeah.
Do you know if it came out before or after this?
I don't know.
What the heck? No, just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so what do you want to...
Oh, yeah.
What do you want to read next?
Next week.
I have a thought already, but...
All right, what's your thought?
I thought that in terms of being an interesting one for the age, chapters 7 and 8 on free immigration and forced integration and on free trade and restricted immigration might be kind of interesting.
Cool.
With all this talk on immigration.
Sure.
Sounds be kind of interesting to see what his opinion is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great.
But I was going to ask, though, like if there's a chapter that you think is better for encapsulating his theory, because I figure after that we should probably read his conclusion and stuff,
Yeah, I mean, like the impossibility of limited government. Well, because he writes in the introduction, you can read any of the chapters in any order.
Right.
I mean, the impossibility of limited government is an interesting idea. It's provocative because people like to think that, if only their guy gets in, then things will be better.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I was thinking that would probably be a good one to end with.
Yeah. Private production of defense is an interesting idea that I think a lot of people haven't thought of.
Right.
So maybe
the Hessian model.
Yeah, maybe we could try for 2. I don't know. We'll see what next week looks like, but
yeah, because isn't that what the Hessians basically were?
Yeah, probably.
Not to be confused with the Hessian matrix, which is a matrix of second derivatives.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we'll try chapter 7, and then I guess as much as you can get of chapter 8.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Chapter 7 is not too long.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right.
Cool. Well, thanks for doing the other one, the second one.
Yeah. Yeah. That was fun.
Good. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I definitely recommend listening through that. What you call it?
What?
YouTube. The YouTube lecture that I sent.
Oh, yeah. I'll listen through the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
All right. See you.
Sweet. See ya.